The same hands that once pulled 12 people from a burning building were now being laughed at for checking a safety harness twice. Tom Barnes, 42, 2 kids, 0 excuses, had been a firefighter for 15 years. He'd earned a Medal of Valor. He'd carried unconscious strangers down 6 flights of smoke-filled stairs. But 3 years ago, he lost the one person he couldn't save. His wife, Emily. Their house. The fire that took her started in the kitchen while he was on shift across town. By the time he got there, it was too late. Now he worked construction. $67 a day. Hard hat, steel toes, and a radio clipped to his belt. The same one he'd carried as a firefighter, still crackling with static he'd never fixed. His foreman, Bradley Watson, 32 years old, and made entirely of ego, called him Grandpa in front of the crew every morning. Slow. Scared. A liability. But in 11 minutes, that crane was going to collapse, and the man laughing loudest would be the one Tom had to run toward the fire to save. Isn't it strange how the people who mock you the most are often the ones you'll bleed for anyway? 5:45 in the morning. The alarm clock rattled on the nightstand, an old digital Timex with numbers that glowed green in the dark. Tom's hand reached out, muscle memory, and silenced it before the second beep. He sat up. The bedroom was cold. November in Denver did that, turned mornings into something you had to push through. He rubbed his face, felt the stubble rough under his palms, and stood. His back ached. 42 wasn't old, but 6 months of construction work had reminded him that his body kept score. Down the hall, Sarah's door was cracked open. 7 years old. She slept with a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Tom stepped inside, careful, and pulled the blanket up over her shoulders. She stirred, mumbled something about ponies, and settled back into sleep. Her hair smelled like the strawberry shampoo Emily used to buy. Tom stood there for a moment, just watching her breathe. Jake's room was darker, 10 years old, and he'd decided nightlights were for babies. Tom found him curled on his side, one arm hanging off the bed. He tucked it back in, smoothed the hair off his forehead. Jake looked like Emily when he slept. Same nose. Same way his mouth opened just slightly, like he was about to ask a question. Tom remembered the night Jake was born, how Emily had held him and cried, how Tom had promised he'd always keep them safe. He'd kept one of those promises. Tom closed the door and went to the kitchen. Breakfast was mechanical. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, 2 for Jake, 1 for Sarah. He used the strawberry jelly Sarah liked, the chunky peanut butter Jake insisted on. He packed them into brown paper bags, added a Horizon milk box to each, then a handful of baby carrots, because that's what the school newsletter said you were supposed to do. He added string cheese for Jake, a granola bar for Sarah. The coffee maker gurgled. Tom poured himself a cup, black, and leaned against the counter. Through the window, the streetlights were still on. The neighborhood was quiet. Everyone else was still asleep. Tom looked at the coffee in his hand and thought about the mornings Emily used to wake up early with him. She'd make pancakes. The kids would stumble in, still half asleep, and she'd put chocolate chips in the batter because that was their favorite. That was before. He thought about the crane. Yesterday, he'd walked past it twice. A Liebherr 150-ton, painted yellow, with a boom arm that stretched 100 feet when fully extended. It had been lifting steel, 4-ton beams, up to the 6th floor of the office building they were working on. Downtown Denver, 8 stories, glass and steel. The kind of place that would have a coffee shop on the ground floor and people in suits walking through the lobby. Tom had heard something. A hiss. Faint. But there. Hydraulic pressure escaping. And he'd smelled it. Burnt metal. Sharp. The kind of smell that meant friction where there shouldn't be friction. He'd looked up at the boom arm and seen it. A hairline crack, maybe 6 inches long, running along the weld seam. He'd told Bradley. Bradley had laughed. "Grandpa," he'd said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you worried the big yellow machine's gonna hurt you?" The crew had laughed too. 15 guys, hard hats, Carhartt jackets, thermoses of coffee. They'd laughed because Bradley laughed, and Bradley was the foreman. That's how it worked. Tom had said nothing. He'd walked away, back to his station on the first floor, and spent the rest of the day hauling 2x4s and rolls of insulation. His hands still knew how to work. That hadn't changed. By 6:30, the kids were awake. Sarah stumbled into the kitchen, hair sticking up in every direction, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one ear. Jake followed, already dressed, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning," Tom said. "Morning, Daddy." Sarah climbed into her chair, rubbing her eyes. Jake sat down, didn't say anything. He poured himself a bowl of Cheerios, added milk, and started eating. Tom watched him, 10 years old, and already he'd learned how to be quiet when something was wrong. Tom sat across from him. "You okay, bud?" Jake looked up. His eyes were like Emily's, hazel with flecks of gold. "Yeah." He wasn't. Tom could see it in the way he held his spoon, the way his shoulders were tight, but he didn't push. You didn't push Jake. He'd talk when he was ready. Sarah, on the other hand, talked immediately. "Daddy, I made you something." She slid off her chair, ran to her backpack, and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper. "For you." She handed it to him. Tom unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. Crayon. A stick figure in a firefighter's uniform, red and yellow, with a helmet and an axe. Above it, in Sarah's careful, slanted handwriting, "My hero, Dad." Below the firefighter, she'd drawn little people with their arms up, like they were waving, or calling for help. Orange and red flames surrounded them, but the firefighter was walking toward them, not away. Tom's throat tightened. He looked at the drawing, at the way Sarah had colored outside the lines, the way the firefighter's face was just 2 dots and a smile. "It's you," Sarah said, smiling. "From when you were a firefighter. Mrs. Alvarez said we should draw our heroes for art class. So I drew you." Tom folded the paper slowly. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't a hero anymore, that heroes didn't let their wives burn, that he was just a guy who hauled plywood and got called grandpa by men half his age. But she was 7, and she was looking at him like he'd hung the moon. So he slipped the drawing into his jacket pocket and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. Do you like it?" "I love it." She beamed. Jake looked at him, then looked away. They ate in silence. Tom made eggs, scrambled with cheese, and toast. The kids ate. He didn't. He wasn't hungry. He sipped his coffee and watched the clock on the microwave count forward. 6:45. Jake pushed his bowl away, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Dad?" Tom looked at him. "Yeah? Why don't you ever talk about when you were a firefighter?" The question hung in the air. Sarah stopped chewing, looked at Tom. Tom set his coffee cup down. "I talk about it." "No, you don't." Jake's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "You never talk about it. Not to us. Not to anyone." "Jake, is it because of Mom?" The room went quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. Tom looked at his son, at the way Jake's jaw was set, the way his eyes were hard. 10 years old, and already he saw too much. "It's complicated, bud." "That's what you always say." Jake stood up, grabbed his backpack. "You know what I think. I think you're ashamed." "Jake, I'm not. Not of being a firefighter. Of not being one anymore." Jake's voice cracked. "And I hate watching them treat you like you're nobody." He walked out of the kitchen. Tom heard the front door open, heard Jake's footsteps on the porch. Sarah looked at Tom, her eyes wide. Is Jake mad? Tom exhaled. He's just worried about me, sweetheart. Are you okay, Daddy? Tom reached over, squeezed her hand. I'm okay. But he wasn't sure if that was true. They finished breakfast in silence. Tom cleaned the dishes, packed the lunches, and grabbed his keys. When they walked outside, Jake was already sitting in the truck, staring out the window. 6:50. Time to go. Tom loaded Sarah into the booster seat, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The radio came on. Some talk show. 2 guys arguing about the Broncos. He turned it off. They drove through the neighborhood. Greenwood was older, the kind of place where the houses were small and the lawns needed mowing. Tom knew most of his neighbors. The Johnsons, 2 doors down, who let their dog bark at 4 in the morning. The Nguyens across the street, who had a son in high school and a daughter who babysat sometimes. The old man at the end of the block, Mr. Callahan, who sat on his porch every afternoon and waved at everyone who passed. Tom thought about what Jake had said. I think you're ashamed. Maybe he was. Not of being a firefighter, but of failing. Of not being fast enough, strong enough, good enough to save the one person who mattered most. They turned onto Colfax Avenue. Traffic was light. The sky was still dark, but the street lights were starting to flicker off one by one, like dominoes. They passed Station 12. Tom saw it before he meant to. The red brick building, the bay doors, the flag hanging from the pole out front. Engine 12 was parked in the first bay, gleaming red and chrome, ready for the next call. Tom could see movement inside. Firefighters doing morning checks, testing equipment. The routine he'd done for 15 years. His hands tightened on the wheel. He felt the radio on his belt, the old Motorola pressing against his hip. He'd kept it all this time, clipped to his belt every single day. He told himself it was just habit. But really, it was a lifeline to something he'd lost. Jake saw it too. That's your old station, right? Tom nodded. Do you miss it? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Tom missed the brotherhood. He missed the certainty of knowing his purpose every time the bell rang. He missed the feeling of walking into fire and walking out with someone who wouldn't have made it otherwise. He missed being someone who mattered, but he didn't miss the nightmares. The smell of smoke that never quite left his clothes, the way his heart would race every time he heard a siren, the guilt that sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold, reminding him that he'd saved strangers, but not Emily. Sometimes, Tom said quietly. Why don't you go back? Tom didn't answer right away. He turned left, away from the station, and kept driving. Finally, he said, because I can't. Why not? Jake. Why not, Dad? Jake's voice was louder now, frustrated. You were good at it. You saved people. Why can't you go back? Tom pulled over. He put the truck in park, turned to face his son. Jake's eyes were wet. Because, Tom said, his voice steady, I can't trust myself anymore. Jake stared at him. What does that mean? It means I made a promise to you and your sister. I promised I'd be here. I promised I wouldn't put myself in situations where I might not come home. And I can't break that promise. But you're miserable. Tom felt something crack inside him. I'm not miserable. Yes, you are. A tear slid down Jake's cheek. You let them treat you like garbage. You don't talk about Mom. You don't talk about anything. And I hate it. Tom reached over, put his hand on Jake's shoulder. Jake didn't pull away. I'm doing the best I can, bud. I know. Jake wiped his eyes with his sleeve. But your best used to be better. The words hit like a punch. Not mean, just true. Tom didn't know what to say. So he just sat there, his hand on Jake's shoulder, and let the silence stretch. Finally, Sarah's voice came from the back seat. "Are we going to school now?" Tom took a breath. "Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to school." He pulled back onto the road. Greenwood Elementary was a low, flat building with a playground out front and a mural of a tiger painted on the side. Tom pulled into the drop-off lane. Sarah unbuckled herself, grabbed her backpack, and leaned forward to kiss Tom on the cheek. "Bye, Daddy. Love you." "Love you too, sweetheart. Have a good day." She opened the door, hopped out, and ran toward the entrance. Tom watched her go. She stopped at the door, turned, and waved. He waved back. Jake sat still for another moment. Then he grabbed his backpack and opened the door. "Jake." He stopped. "I'm sorry," Tom said. Jake looked at him. His eyes were red. "For what?" "For not being who you need me to be." Jake's face softened. "Dad, I don't need you to be anything. I just need you to stop pretending you're okay when you're not." He got out of the truck and walked toward the school. Tom sat there, engine idling, and watched him go. Then he put the truck in gear and drove to work. The job site was on the corner of 16th and Blake, downtown. An 8-story office building, steel frame, glass panels, the kind of thing that would be sleek and modern when it was done, but right now looked like a skeleton. Tom parked in the gravel lot across the street, grabbed his hard hat and gloves from the passenger seat, and walked toward the gate. It was 6:58. He was 2 minutes late. Bradley Watson was waiting. He stood at the entrance, arms crossed, a clipboard tucked under one arm. 32 years old, broad shoulders, clean-shaven, with a smirk that seemed permanently attached to his face. He wore a brand-new hard hat, bright white, no scratches, and a safety vest that still had the creases from being folded in the package. "Grandpa's here," Bradley called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. 2 minutes late, again. The crew was already there, 15 guys standing around the tool trailer, drinking coffee from thermoses and gas station cups. They turned. Some of them grinned. A few chuckled. One of them, Chris, 24, still had acne on his neck, shook his head and looked away. Tom didn't say anything. He walked past Bradley, through the gate, and stopped at the sign-in sheet. He wrote his name, the time, and his badge number. His handwriting was neat. 15 years as a firefighter, you learned to write clearly. Reports mattered. Documentation mattered. Bradley stepped up behind him. "You know, Tom, I've been thinking. Maybe we should have a safety demonstration this morning. What do you say?" Tom turned. Bradley was smiling. "A demonstration?" "Yeah. You know, since you're so concerned about safety, I think the guys would benefit from watching you do a full gear check, real thorough. Show them how it's done." The crew was watching now. All of them. Tom could feel their eyes. "That's not necessary," Tom said quietly. "Oh, I think it is." Bradley raised his voice. "Guys, gather round. Tom here is going to show us the proper way to check your safety harness, step by step. Because apparently, checking it once isn't enough." Someone laughed. Someone else whistled. Tom stood there. His hands were at his sides. His jaw was tight. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell Bradley to stop. He wanted to grab the man by his pristine vest and ask him why. Why the daily humiliation? Why the need to make Tom feel small? But if he did, if he pushed back, Bradley would make his life harder. Maybe dock his pay. Maybe cut his hours. Maybe just fire him outright. He had Sarah and Jake to think about. He had rent. $1,200 a month for a 2-bedroom house with a leaky roof and a furnace that rattled when it ran. So he said nothing. Bradley handed him a harness. "Go on. Show us." Tom took it. He clipped it around his waist, adjusted the straps, checked the D-ring, the buckle, the webbing. He did it slowly, methodically, the way he'd been trained. Once. Twice. A third time. The crew watched. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Most of them just looked amused. "There you go," Bradley said when Tom was done. "See? Grandpa's scared of his own shadow. Triple checks everything. Like the harness is gonna bite him." More laughter. Louder this time. Tom unclipped the harness, handed it back, and walked away. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the first floor, to the pile of materials he'd been assigned to move, and started working. Behind him, he heard Bradley's voice, still loud, still mocking. "All right, guys, show's over. Let's get to work. And try not to be as slow as Grandpa, huh?" Tom picked up a sheet of plywood. It was heavy, 3/4 inch, 8 feet by 4 feet, probably 60 pounds. He hoisted it onto his shoulder and carried it to the other side of the floor, where the framers were building interior walls. His hands didn't shake. His back didn't complain. He'd carried heavier things. He'd carried people. He'd carried a woman down 5 flights of stairs once, unconscious, smoke inhalation, her body limp in his arms. She'd lived. He remembered her name. Rachel Mendez. She'd sent him a Christmas card every year for 10 years. He wondered if she still did. He wondered if the cards went to Station 12 and nobody forwarded them. He set the plywood down, went back for another sheet, and kept working. By 9 o'clock, Tom had moved 40 sheets of plywood, 30 bags of concrete mix, and a dozen bundles of rebar. His shirt was soaked through with sweat. His shoulders ached, but he didn't stop. At 9:15, Bradley walked over. He had his clipboard, a pencil behind his ear, and that same smirk. "You're behind schedule, Tom." Tom looked at him. "Behind schedule?" "Yeah. You should have had all this moved by 8:30. But you're slow. Like always." Tom glanced at the pile of materials he'd already moved. It was twice what anyone else on the crew had done. "I'm not slow." "Sure you are." Bradley stepped closer. "You know what I think? I think you're washed up, old, past your prime, and the only reason we keep you around is because we need bodies. Any body. Even a slow, scared one." Tom's hands curled into fists. He felt the anger rising, hot and sharp, the way it used to before Emily died. Back then, he would have said something. He would have stood up for himself. But that was before he had kids to feed and a dead wife haunting his dreams. "I'm doing my job," Tom said quietly. "Barely." Bradley turned to walk away, then stopped. "Oh, and Tom? Next time you want to play safety inspector, keep it to yourself. Nobody cares what the old guy thinks." He walked away, laughing. Tom stood there, breathing hard, his fists still clenched. Around him, the job site buzzed with activity. Saws whined, hammers pounded, men shouted instructions. But Tom heard none of it. All he heard was Jake's voice. "I hate watching them treat you like you're nobody." And maybe Jake was right. Maybe Tom had let himself become nobody. He went back to work. By 10:30, the sun was out. The temperature had climbed into the mid-50s, warm for November. Tom was sweating under his flannel shirt. He'd taken off his jacket, hung it on a nail, and rolled up his sleeves. His arms were marked with old scars, thin white lines, some from burns, some from cuts, all from years of crawling through places on fire. He walked past the crane. It was running. The operator, a guy named Luis, sat in the cab 70 feet up, controlling the boom with levers and pedals. The crane's engine rumbled, a deep diesel growl, and the boom swung slowly to the left, carrying a 4-ton steel beam toward the 6th floor. Tom stopped. He smelled it again. Burnt metal. Stronger now. And the sound, a hiss, faint but steady, like air escaping from a tire. He looked up. The boom arm was extended almost all the way, 100 feet of yellow steel stretching into the sky. Near the midpoint, where the hydraulic cylinder connected to the arm, he saw it. The crack. It was longer now. 8 inches, maybe 10. And there was something else. A dark stain spreading slowly along the metal. Hydraulic fluid. Leaking. Tom's pulse quickened. He'd seen this before. Not on a crane, but on a ladder truck. Station 12, 5 years ago. A hydraulic line had burst during a call, and the ladder had come down fast, almost hit 2 guys on the ground. They'd been lucky. The ladder had missed them by inches, but the incident report had been brutal. Failure to identify structural weakness. Negligence. The captain had been demoted. Tom had been the one who spotted the warning signs that day. Too late, but he'd spotted them. A hairline crack, a faint smell of burnt hydraulic fluid, the same signs he was seeing now. This crane wasn't going to miss anyone. Tom looked around. Bradley was on the 2nd floor, talking to one of the electricians. Tom walked over, climbed the stairs, and approached him. Bradley. Bradley turned, annoyed. What? I need to talk to you about the crane. Bradley sighed. Jesus, Tom, not this again. There's a crack in the boom arm. It's getting worse. And there's hydraulic fluid leaking. If that line bursts... Tom. Bradley held up a hand. Stop. The crane passed inspection yesterday. It's fine. I'm telling you, it's not fine. I can smell it. Burnt metal. That means friction. That means the metal's under stress. And when metal's under stress, it fails. Fast. Bradley stared at him. You can smell it? Yes. What are you, a bloodhound? Bradley laughed. Grandpa's got a magic nose. Guys, come listen to this. 2 electricians turned, grinned. Tom here says the crane's gonna fall down because he smelled something, Bradley said, loud enough for them to hear. You believe that? They laughed. Tom felt his face burn. I'm not making this up. I know what I'm talking about. Really? Because last I checked, you're a laborer, not an engineer, not a crane operator, not a safety inspector. You're the guy who moves plywood. So how about you stick to that and let the professionals handle the crane? Tom stood there. He wanted to tell Bradley about the 15 years, about the calls, about the ladder truck, about the fact that he'd been trained to recognize structural failure because lives depended on it. But Bradley was already walking away, back to his conversation with the electricians, dismissing Tom like he was a child. Tom descended the stairs. He walked back to the 1st floor, but he didn't pick up another sheet of plywood. Instead, he looked for James Caldwell. James was the project manager. 60 years old, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a reputation for being fair. He'd been in construction for 35 years, back when things were built slower and safer. Tom respected him. More than that, Tom hoped James would listen. He found James near the tool trailer, looking at blueprints spread across a folding table. He was on the phone, nodding, scribbling notes in the margin. Tom waited. James finished the call, set his phone down, and looked up. Tom, what's up? Mr. Caldwell, I need to talk to you about the crane. James frowned. The crane? What about it? There's a crack in the boom arm and a hydraulic leak. I think we need to shut it down. James set down his pen. Tom, Brad told me you mentioned this yesterday. He said he checked it out. The crane's fine. With respect, sir, I don't think it is. Tom chose his words carefully. I have experience with structural failure. I used to... He stopped. He almost said it. I used to be a firefighter. I was trained to read collapse patterns. I know how to spot the signs because I've pulled people out of buildings that were about to come down. But the word stuck in his throat. Because admitting he used to be a firefighter meant admitting he wasn't anymore. And that felt like defeat. I just think we should shut it down, Tom finished, before someone gets hurt. James looked at him for a long moment. His expression was kind, but firm. "Tom, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But if Brad says it's fine, it's fine. He's been doing this for 10 years. I trust my foreman." He turned back to the blueprints. Tom stood there. He felt the weight of the conversation, the weight of being dismissed, the weight of knowing something was wrong and not being able to make anyone listen. He thought about the 12 people in that apartment building, the ones he'd pulled out, the ones who'd lived because he'd seen the signs, cracking plaster, sagging beams, the smell of gas, and acted. Nobody had believed him then either, until the building collapsed 20 minutes after the last person was evacuated. He walked away. As he did, the radio on his belt, the old Motorola, the one from Station 12, suddenly crackled to life. Static. Loud. Harsh. Like a burst of white noise. Tom stopped. He looked down at the radio. He hadn't turned it on. He never turned it on. It didn't even have a battery that worked anymore. It was just a relic, a piece of his old life he couldn't let go of. But it was making noise. He pressed the talk button. Nothing happened. The static continued for a moment, then faded to silence. Tom stared at the radio. His heart was pounding. He remembered the last time he'd heard that radio work. 3 years ago. The night Emily died. He'd been at Station 12, filling out paperwork after a call. The radio had been on his desk, charging, and then the dispatcher's voice had come through. "Structure fire, 2247 Ash Street. All units respond." Tom had frozen. 2247 Ash Street. That was his address. He'd grabbed the radio, run to his truck, driven 90 miles an hour through red lights and stop signs. By the time he'd gotten there, the house was fully involved. Flames through the roof. Black smoke pouring from every window. His neighbors standing on the lawn, watching. Helpless. He'd tried to go in. Danny, his partner, had tackled him, held him down while he screamed Emily's name. She'd been in the kitchen, upstairs. The stairs had already collapsed. There was no way in. No way to save her. The radio on his belt was silent now, but Tom could still hear that dispatcher's voice. 2247 Ash Street. He clipped the radio back onto his belt and kept walking. 11:15. Tom sat on a stack of pallets, eating his lunch. A sandwich, white bread, deli turkey, mustard, wrapped in plastic wrap. Jake had made it this morning. The slices of turkey were uneven, and there was too much mustard on one side, but Tom ate it anyway. It tasted like care. Around him, the crew was scattered. Some guys sat in the shade of the building. Others stood near the tool trailer, talking and laughing. Chris, the 24-year-old with acne, walked over and sat down next to Tom. "Hey," Tom nodded. "Hey. Man, I'm sorry about this morning. That whole harness thing. That was messed up." Tom shrugged. "It's fine. It's not fine. Bradley's an asshole." Chris lowered his voice. "Why do you let him do that? I mean, dude, you're twice his age. You don't have to take that shit." Tom took a bite of his sandwich, chewed, swallowed. "I need this job." "Yeah, but I need this job," Tom repeated, quieter. "I've got 2 kids, rent's due in a week. I can't afford to make waves." Chris looked at him, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're right about the crane. I heard it this morning, that hissing sound. It's not normal." Tom looked at him. "You heard it?" "Yeah, but when I mentioned it to Luis, he said it's always like that. Said it's just the hydraulic settling." Chris shrugged. "Maybe he's right. Or maybe he's wrong." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Chris stood, brushed crumbs off his jeans, and walked away. Tom finished his sandwich. He balled up the plastic wrap and stuffed it into his pocket. He looked up at the crane. It was still running, still lifting steel, still making that faint hissing sound. And now, if he listened carefully, he could hear something else. A creak. metal under stress. He stood. He was about to go back to work when he heard it. A crack. Not loud, not like a gunshot, but sharp, metallic, the sound of something breaking under pressure. Tom's head snapped up. He saw it. The crack in the boom arm, spreading, a spiderweb of fractures racing along the weld seam. And then, the hydraulic line burst. Fluid sprayed out, dark and oily, misting into the air like blood from an artery. The crane shuddered. Tom ran. "Get back!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the job site. "The crane's failing! Everyone get back!" Heads turned. Some guys stopped mid-conversation. Others just stared at him, confused. Bradley was on the second floor. He leaned over the railing, glaring down at Tom. "Barnes, what the hell are you—" A second crack. Louder this time. The boom arm tilted, just slightly, but enough. The 4-ton steel beam it was carrying swung sideways, momentum carrying it faster than Luis, the operator, could compensate. Luis pulled levers, hit the emergency brake, but physics didn't care. The beam swung wide, a pendulum of steel, and slammed into the side of the building. The impact rang out like a bell. The crew scattered. Men dropped tools, dropped coffee cups, and ran. Boots pounded on gravel. Voices shouted. Someone yelled for Luis to get out of the cab. Tom ran too, not away but toward the crane, toward Bradley, who was still standing on the second floor, frozen, watching the beam swing toward him like a wrecking ball. "Bradley, move!" The beam didn't hit him. It missed by 10 feet. But it hit something else, a 50-gallon drum of diesel fuel stored near the base of the crane for the generators. The drum was steel, painted red, with a hazard label on the side. The beam struck it dead center. The drum split open. Diesel poured out, thick and black, pooling on the ground. It spread fast, following the slope of the concrete, a river of fuel searching for a spark. And then the crane found one. The boom arm, tilting now at a 30-degree angle, scraped against the steel frame of the building. Metal on metal. The friction was instant, violent. Sparks flew, bright orange in the morning light, cascading down like fireworks. One spark landed in the diesel. The fuel ignited. It didn't explode. It didn't roar. It just bloomed. A low, spreading wave of fire that crawled across the ground, following the trail of diesel, eating it up, growing hotter and brighter with every second. The flames were orange at the edges, white at the center, the kind of heat that melted steel. The crew ran. All of them. Away from the fire, away from the crane, toward the gate. Tom heard their boots pounding on gravel, heard someone yelling for Luis to get out of the cab, heard the crane's engine still rumbling, oblivious to the chaos below. And then he heard something else. A scream. Bradley. Tom turned. He saw him. Bradley had tried to run down the stairs from the second floor, but the stairs were metal, and the fire had turned them into a griddle. He'd stopped at the top, turned back, and now he was at the edge of the platform, looking for another way down. There wasn't one. And worse, a piece of steel rebar, knocked loose by the swinging beam, had fallen across his leg. He was pinned. Bradley tried to move it. His hand slipped. The rebar was thick, half an inch in diameter, and it had landed with the weight of momentum behind it. Bradley pulled, heaved, but his leg wouldn't come free. "Help!" Bradley screamed, his voice raw, breaking. "I can't move! Someone help me!" No one moved. The crew stood at the gate, 60 feet away, watching the fire, watching Bradley. Not moving. Tom stood 20 feet from the fire. He could feel the heat already, radiating off the flames, pushing against his skin like a hand. The diesel burned hot, over 1,000 degrees, and the smoke was black, thick, the kind that filled your lungs and didn't let go. He saw Emily, Not Bradley. Emily. She was in the kitchen. The fire had started there. An electrical short in the outlet behind the stove. By the time the smoke alarm went off, it was too late. The flames had spread to the cabinets, the walls, the ceiling. Emily had tried to get out. She'd made it to the stairs, but the stairs had collapsed. Tom had seen the report later. The fire investigator's report. It said she'd died of smoke inhalation. It said she'd been unconscious before the flames reached her. It said she hadn't suffered. Tom didn't believe it. He saw her now, in the flames, reaching for him, calling his name. And he couldn't move. His legs wouldn't work. His lungs wouldn't fill. His whole body shook, locked in place by 3 years of guilt and grief. Bradley screamed again. "Please, somebody!" Tom saw him, saw the fear in his eyes, saw the way his hands clawed at the rebar, desperate, futile. And Tom thought about the 12 people in the apartment building, the ones he'd saved, the ones who'd lived because he'd run toward the fire when everyone else ran away. He thought about Sarah's drawing. "My hero, Dad." He thought about Jake's question. "Why don't you tell them you were a firefighter?" Because I'm not a hero anymore, Tom had thought. Because heroes don't let their wives burn. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe being a hero wasn't about never failing. Maybe it was about getting up after you failed. About running toward the fire even when you were terrified. Even when every cell in your body screamed at you to run away. The radio on his belt crackled. Static, loud, insistent. And then, impossibly, a voice. "Firefighter Barnes, report." Tom's head snapped down. He looked at the radio. It was dead. The screen was dark. But he'd heard it. He'd heard the dispatcher. Or maybe he hadn't. Maybe it was his mind, playing tricks. Or maybe it was something else. A memory. A ghost. A piece of the man he used to be, reminding him that he was still in there, buried under the fear and the guilt. But still there. Tom reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the folded piece of construction paper. He unfolded it with shaking hands. "My hero, Dad." Sarah's drawing. The firefighter with the axe. The people with their arms up, calling for help. And the firefighter, walking toward them. Not away. Tom stared at it. His hand stopped shaking. He thought about Jake, asking him why he didn't fight back. He thought about Sarah, believing he was still a hero. He thought about Emily and the promise he'd made to her the day they got married. "I'll always protect the people I love." He'd failed her. He knew that. But maybe he could keep the promise anyway. Not by hiding, not by running, but by being who he'd always been. Tom folded the paper carefully, put it back in his pocket, and unclipped the radio from his belt. He pressed the talk button. "Station 12, he whispered. Barnes responding. He took a breath. Deep. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way they'd taught him at the academy. Pass technique. Breathe. Assess. Act. He breathed. The air was hot, thick with smoke, but he filled his lungs. He assessed. The fire was 20 feet across, burning diesel low to the ground. The smoke was rising, but not thick yet. He had maybe 2 minutes before it got worse. Bradley was on the second floor, 30 feet away, pinned by rebar. The stairs were blocked by fire. No ladder, no rope, no backup. Just Tom. He acted. Tom pulled his flannel shirt off, wrapped it around his nose and mouth, and ran toward the fire. He stayed low, crouched, the way he'd been trained. Heat rises. The air near the ground was cooler, relatively. He could feel the flames licking at his jeans, could smell his hair singeing, could feel the heat on his face like he'd opened an oven. But he kept moving. He reached the base of the stairs. They were metal, and the fire had turned them into a skillet. He couldn't climb them. But there was a vertical steel beam next to the stairs, part of the building's frame, with crossbeams every 10 feet for support. Tom grabbed the beam and climbed. Hand over hand, boots finding purchase on the crossbeams, pulling himself up. His arms burned. His lungs screamed for air. But he didn't stop. He reached the second-floor platform. Bradley was there, lying on his stomach, the rebar across his right leg. His face was pale, slick with sweat, streaked with soot. His eyes were wide, panicked. "Tom!" Bradley's voice cracked. I can't breathe." "Don't talk," Tom said, his voice calm, controlled, the voice of a man who'd done this 100 times. "Save your air." He knelt down, examined the rebar. It was a half-inch rod, maybe 5 feet long, pinning Bradley's leg just below the knee. The weight wasn't crushing, but it was enough to trap him. Tom looked around, found another piece of rebar lying nearby, shorter, thicker. He grabbed it, positioned it under the longer rod, and used it as a lever. "On 3, Tom said. "You pull your leg out, understand?" Bradley nodded, gasping, his chest heaving. 1. Tom adjusted his grip on the makeshift lever. 2. He took a breath, planted his feet. 3. Tom pushed down on the lever with everything he had. The longer rod lifted just an inch, but it was enough. Bradley screamed, a raw, primal sound, and pulled his leg free. He rolled onto his back, gasping. The crane collapsed. The boom arms snapped completely, 100 feet of steel crashing down onto the platform where they'd been standing just seconds ago. The impact shook the ground. Dust exploded into the air. The fire roared, fueled by more diesel from the crane's ruptured tank, spreading fast. Tom didn't hesitate. He grabbed Bradley by the arm, hauled him up, and draped the man's arm over his shoulders. Bradley was dead weight, 200 pounds of muscle and panic. "Come on," Tom said. "We're moving." Now. They couldn't use the stairs. The fire had spread, blocking the path. Tom half-dragged, half-carried Bradley to the edge of the platform, where a pile of sandbags had been stacked as a makeshift barrier. He shoved the bags off, creating a slope of sand and fabric, and slid down, pulling Bradley with him. They landed hard, 10 feet from the fire. Tom felt his ankle twist, pain shooting up his leg, but he didn't stop. He kept pulling, kept moving, dragging Bradley across the concrete, away from the flames, away from the smoke. 30 feet. 40. 50. Finally, they were clear. Tom set Bradley down on the ground, positioned him on his side, recovery position, and checked his pulse. Strong. Breathing. Alive. Tom stood, looked back at the fire. The crane was a wreck. The boom arm was twisted, the cab tilted, the flames spreading across the platform like a living thing. But everyone was out. Everyone was safe. The crew stood at the gate, silent. 15 men, hard hats in their hands, staring. Not laughing. Not moving. Just staring. Tom turned away. He walked over to where his jacket was hanging, picked it up and put it on. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the fact that he'd just run into a fire for the first time in 3 years, and he hadn't frozen. James Caldwell walked over. Slowly, his face was pale. He looked at Tom, then at the radio on his belt. He pointed at it. "That's a Station 12 issue radio, isn't it?" Tom nodded. James's eyes softened. "My son was FDNY. Tower 1, September 11th. Tom didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood there, and James stood with him. And for a moment, they shared the weight of loss. Then James turned to the crew. His voice was loud, clear, the voice of a man who'd been in charge of job sites for 35 years and had seen everything. "This man," he said, pointing at Tom, "is a decorated firefighter. Medal of Valor, 15 years with Denver Fire. He warned us about that crane. Twice, and we didn't listen." The crew shifted. Some of them looked down at the ground. Others looked at Tom, seeing him for the first time. James continued. If it wasn't for Tom, Bradley would be dead right now. Hell, we all might be dead. So I want you to remember something. The next time you think someone's too old, too slow, too scared, you remember that the guy you're laughing at might be the one who saves your life. Silence. Bradley was on a stretcher now. The paramedics had arrived. 2 guys in navy blue uniforms, loading him into the back of an ambulance. But before they closed the doors, Bradley turned his head, looked at Tom. "You..." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "You saved me." Tom walked over, stood next to the stretcher. "After I..." Bradley's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks, cutting tracks through the soot. "Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For everything. For calling you Grandpa. For the harness thing. For not listening. I'm so sorry." Tom didn't say anything. He just put his hand on Bradley's shoulder. Gentle. The way you'd touch someone who was hurting. "You're okay," Tom said quietly. "That's all that matters." Bradley sobbed. The paramedics closed the doors. The ambulance pulled away, siren wailing. Chris, the 24-year-old, walked up to Tom. His eyes were wide, glistening. "Sir, I didn't know. We didn't know." Tom looked at him. "It's fine." "No, it's not. You're..." Chris stopped, shook his head. "You're a hero." Tom looked down at the radio on his belt. It was silent now. No static. No voices. Just an old piece of equipment that didn't work anymore. He unclipped it, held it in his hand for a moment, then clipped it back on. "I was just doing my job," he said. "3:30 in the afternoon. Tom pulled into the drop-off lane at Greenwood Elementary. His truck still smelled like smoke. His hands still had soot under the nails. His face was streaked with black, and there was a burn on his forearm, red and blistering, that he'd have to bandage later. His ankle throbbed where he'd twisted it. But he was there. On time. Sarah saw him first. She came running out of the building, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her hair flying behind her. She stopped when she got close, staring at him. "Daddy, why are you dirty?" Tom smiled, his face cracking the dried soot. "Long day, sweetheart." Jake walked out slower. He saw Tom, saw the soot, saw the burn on his arm, and his eyes went wide. He walked up to the truck, opened the passenger door, and climbed in. He stared at Tom for a long moment. Sarah climbed into the back seat. "Daddy, what happened? Did you get hurt?" Tom looked at Jake. Jake looked back, and Tom saw it. The question in his son's eyes. The hope. "Dad," Jake said quietly, "did you fight today?" Tom's throat tightened. He thought about the fire, about Bradley, about the crane collapsing, and the moment he'd decided to run toward the flames instead of away. He nodded. "Yeah, buddy, I did." Jake's face broke into a grin. Not a big one, just a small, proud smile. "Did you win?" Tom thought about Bradley's tears, about the crew's silence, about James's words, about the fact that he'd faced his biggest fear and come out the other side. "Yeah," he said. "I think I did." Sarah leaned forward between the seats. "Daddy, did you use your firefighter skills?" Tom looked at her in the rearview mirror. "I did." She reached into her backpack, pulled out another folded piece of paper. This one was a photocopy of the original drawing, and held it up. "Mrs. Alvarez made copies for everyone in class. Everyone wanted one. I told them my dad's a hero." Tom felt something break inside him. Not break like shatter. Break like a dam that had been holding back 3 years of grief and guilt and fear. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, put it in park, and turned around. He pulled both kids into a hug. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck. Jake leaned in, his head against Tom's shoulder, and Tom felt his son's body shaking. Jake was crying. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Jake whispered. Tom held them both, and he cried too. For the first time in 3 years, he let himself cry. Not from sadness, not from loss, but from relief. From the weight of carrying something heavy for so long and finally being able to set it down. "I love you guys," he whispered. "We love you too, Daddy," Sarah said. Jake pulled back, wiped his eyes, and looked at Tom. "Are you going to go back to the fire department?" Tom shook his head. "No." Jake frowned. "Why not?" Tom thought about it, about the years at Station 12, about the calls, the fires, the people he'd saved, about Emily, and the one person he couldn't, about Sarah and Jake, and the promise he'd made to keep them safe. "Because," Tom said slowly, "I'm not running from who I was anymore, but I don't need to go back to prove it. I can be that person, right here." Jake nodded slowly, understanding. "Okay." They drove home. Tom took a detour, stopped at a Dairy Queen, and bought them all blizzards. Sarah got Oreo. Jake got Reese's. Tom got vanilla. They sat in the parking lot, eating in comfortable silence, and Tom thought about how simple moments like this, ice cream with his kids on a Tuesday afternoon, were the ones that mattered most. When they got home, the house was still small, still had the same peeling linoleum and sagging couch. But it felt different, lighter somehow. Tom made dinner, spaghetti. The kids helped. Sarah stirred the sauce. Jake set the table. They ate together, and this time Tom told them about the fire. Not all of it, not the scary parts, but enough. Enough for them to understand what had happened. Enough for them to see that their dad was still the man he used to be. After dinner, Tom went to his bedroom. He took the radio off his belt, the old Motorola from Station 12, and looked at it. It was scratched, dented, covered in soot. It didn't work. It hadn't worked in years. But today, it had reminded him who he was. And maybe that was enough. Tom walked to the living room. He cleared a space on the shelf above the TV, next to a framed photo of him and Emily on their wedding day, and set the radio down. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he looked at the photo. Emily was smiling. She was wearing a white dress, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Tom was in a suit, his arm around her waist, grinning like an idiot. They looked so young, so happy, so full of plans. Tom reached out, touched the frame gently. "I miss you," he whispered. "Every day I miss you. But I think," his voice broke, "I think I'm going to be okay now." He turned away, walked back to the kitchen, and started washing the dishes. The water was warm. The soap smelled like lemon. And for the first time in 3 years, Tom felt something like peace. A week later, Tom went back to the job site. James Caldwell was waiting for him at the gate. He had a folder in his hand, official-looking, with the company logo on the front. "Tom, I want to talk to you about a promotion. Safety supervisor, $95 a day, full benefits, dental, the whole package." Tom thought about it. It was a good offer. More money, more respect, a real title. But he shook his head. "I appreciate it, Mr. Caldwell, but I'm okay where I am." James frowned. "You sure? You've got skills most of these guys don't have. Skills that could save lives." "I'm sure." Tom paused. "I don't need a title to know who I am anymore. I just need to do good work and treat people right." James studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, the offer stands." He extended his hand. "And Tom, thank you for everything." They shook hands. Bradley came back 2 days later. His leg was in a cast, and he walked with crutches. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned that the world was more fragile than he'd thought. He found Tom during lunch, sitting on the same stack of pallets, eating a sandwich Jake had made. This one with turkey and Swiss, cut diagonally, wrapped in wax paper with a note that said, "Love you, Dad," in Jake's careful handwriting. Bradley didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, awkward, shifting his weight from one crutch to the other. Then, he held out a paper bag. "For your kids," he said. Tom took the bag. Inside was a Starbucks gift card for $100 and a handwritten note on lined paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was shaky. "I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. Thank you for saving my life. You didn't have to, but you did. I'll never forget that. Bradley." Tom looked up at Bradley. The man's eyes were red, like he'd been crying. His face was thinner. He looked older. "We're good," Tom said. Bradley's throat worked. "We're not. But maybe someday." He paused. "I talked to my wife about what happened, about how I've been acting. She said I've been turning into my dad. He was like that. Mean. And I swore I'd never be like him." His voice cracked. "But I was, to you, and I'm sorry." Tom stood up, stepped forward, and held out his hand. Bradley looked at it, then took it. They shook. "Thank you," Bradley whispered. He turned and walked away, crutches clicking on concrete. The next morning, 6:56, Tom arrived at the job site, on time. He walked through the gate, signed in, and grabbed his hard hat. No one called him Grandpa. Chris walked over, coffee in hand. "Morning, Tom." Not Grandpa. Not old man, just Tom. "Morning," Tom said. The rest of the crew nodded as he passed. Some smiled, a few waved. And when he walked past the new crane, a different model with fresh paint and a safety inspector's tag dated 2 days ago, one of the operators, a guy named Miguel, called out, "Hey, Tom, mind taking a look at this? Just want to make sure everything's good." Tom walked over. He checked the hydraulic lines, the boom arm, the welds. Everything was solid. He gave Miguel a thumbs up. "Looks good. Thanks, man. I trust your eye." At lunch, Tom sat with the crew. They asked him about firefighting, about the calls he'd been on, the fires he'd seen, the people he'd saved. And for the first time in 3 years, Tom talked about it. Not about Emily. Not about the fire that took her. But about the rest of it. The good parts. The brotherhood. The calls where everything went right. The thank you letters from the people he'd pulled from cars, from buildings, from rivers. The crew listened, and when he was done, Chris raised his coffee cup. To Tom. The others raised theirs. To Tom. Tom smiled. He raised his thermos, the same battered Stanley, older than his kids, and took a sip. The radio on his belt was quiet. No static. No voices. Just silent. And that was okay. Because Tom didn't need the radio to remind him who he was anymore. He already knew. They say you can't go back, that the past is behind you, that who you were is gone, buried under the weight of who you've had to become. But sometimes, the past isn't gone, it's just waiting. Waiting for the right moment to remind you who you always were. Tom Barnes learned that the hard way. He learned it in fire, in fear, in the moment when he had to choose between running away and running toward, between letting his past define him and letting it guide him. And when he ran toward, he found something he thought he'd lost. Not his job, not his title, not even his pride. He found himself. The man who'd saved 12 people from a burning building was still there, under the soot and the scars and the shame. Still there, waiting to be called back. And all it took was a crane collapsing, a fire spreading, and a choice. Run away, or run toward. Tom chose toward, and that choice changed everything.